Howdy, folks. Welcome back to the Pulse. My name is Matt. This is Crypto Heartbeat, and it is once again Friday. It's March 22nd, 11 o'clock Central Texas time, and it is Stephen Friday once again. Whew. Folks, how are you doing? There's a lot going on in this world. There's a lot going on in crypto. There's a lot just going on. And there's a lot of people acting really strangely, and it's across the world. I mean, I don't know if it's the eclipse that's coming up or if it's just a sign of the times, but boy, there's not a more important time for the message today that we're going to be drilling into. And this is really about what is real life? What is the meaning of this whole thing and how do we see our, existence, right? You probably woke up this morning, I would assume, right? You're watching this. You woke up this morning and you're like, "Well, I got another one." And then not a lot of times, we wake up and we're like, "All right, I've got things to do." And you probably have responsibilities. I've got kids. I mean, I got to take my son to track practice, for example. You have things that you've got to do, and you don't really think about the fact that you woke up this morning. You don't think about, the nature of your life because you're just kind of doing the routine. And, you're kind of facing the day, facing things. And of course, you probably have some real serious concerns. I pretty much don't go a day without hearing something of someone who is sick or injured or has, a major challenge in their life. And then you couple that with what's going on financially, and you've got some real hardship out there. And so if you're somebody that's going through that, and I can't imagine that either you aren't going through something difficult or you don't know somebody who's going through something very difficult. And a big part of what we're doing here is, and what I did with Steve and Steve did with me for as long as he did, is really to encourage one another. I mean, that's the whole point of this. But it's also to have, I think, reflect on things that are real wisdom, and that's what I'm trying to do. Right? We don't, and I think we recognize this if we take any stock of our lives. We don't do it well. I don't do it well. I mess things up all the time, and I kind of fumble around, and I know that this world that I'm in is not heaven, and so what we do here on Fridays, right side up, is we say, you know what, the world is upside down. We recognize that it's upside down. We recognize that we're in a system that is really set up to enslave us, and we want to make sense of it. And that's all I want to do, right? I want to be able to have peace. I want to have security and safety. I want to be able to provide. I mean, there's a lot of different things, and I imagine that you're similar to that. Why would you be in crypto, right? Probably because you're like, well, something's got to change here. And if it doesn't, it's going to be really, really difficult. And this is kind of the best thing I've seen that might be able to change my circumstances. So you're likely not in crypto unless you're a hopeful person and potentially somewhat optimistic, or you're a real practical person that goes, hey, I've seen that other people have gotten, massive gains. I'd like to participate in that too. But I would suggest, and what we're going to be talking about today and listening to and hearing from Steve is really almost have to back out even further and understand the context of what this is that we are in, live in. And there's some amazing stuff that this episode uh, really dives into. And then we may have a guest who joins us at the very end. But I just want to welcome you back to Right Side Up in honor of Steve Staggs. This is episode 45. What is real life? Um, a lot of what we see, and the context of the physical world is we're told a story. We're told a story of where we come from. Of course, if you've got a family, you've been told who you are by people in your family since you were a kid. Sometimes those stories are true and sometimes they're not. The mainstream view in popular culture is that over billions and billions of years after a big bang, we just kind of crawled out of the ooze and then we turned into this. I mean, that's basically it, right? By accident, you were here. Well, I've got an alternative explanation for you. And that's really what we kind of dive into. And I'm just so thankful for the life of Steve Staggs and what he built into me that I want to continue to pass it along to you. And so if you're somebody that's interested and open to um, really diving into real serious conversations. Because I find that most people, they don't want to talk about serious stuff, right? They kind of reject that stuff. They're just like, I don't want to talk about stuff that's like that. Well, I do, and I want to, and I think it's really helpful for us because everything has to be understood in context. And so, if in fact the story that we've been listening to and hearing is not true, what is the true story? And how do you figure out what it is? And how do you test and approve it? And how do you know if there's a God? How do you know as well? All that stuff is wrapped up in what we're talking about today. I'm going to basically say hello to you and then we're going to jump into it. Dan McMillan, you're number one. You beat your buddy Mike Ostell to the plate today. Where are you, Mike? He's like, I'm right here. Good morning, Dan, and all my RSU buds. Thanks for being here. Actually, Steve talks about Mike in this episode quite extensively, so that's going to be kind of fun. Good morning to you. Adam and Eve were the first of all unions to defy management. There you go. Mutiny. What's up, Mayo and Hexclun? Thanks for being here. 44 people. I want to say a special welcome to those of you who are viewing this on the X platform on Twitter, the former Twitter. Most of, I think we had over 200 people the last time, 162 on the last right set up, which is just blows my mind. And so thank you for being here. I think you're going to be blessed by this content. So welcome to you. If you are on the X platform and you can make a comment, I'd love to have you say hello. I will say hello back. I'd love to acknowledge your presence, and thanks for joining us. And without further ado, let's jump into an amazing conversation with Steve Staggs. And I'm really fascinated with this idea of if the souls of men are eternal, then this is not life. And I've mentioned that before with you, but I'm still really interested in this idea that here I am in my meat suit, right? And my meat suit's degrading. And I was watching, and you're gonna love this. So I was watching this he's longtime military guy. He's in the Air Force. And prior to the moon, them wanting to go to the moon, they didn't understand the effects of G-force, and they were trying to figure out what was going on with rockets. And so they would use a centrifuge, right? So they'd put a guy in a pilot, and they would test how many G's can he handle before he blacks out. And so, in the early days, they didn't realize that it was 7.3 or something like that, right? Like some number. But that most people, even if you flexed your muscles and held your breath or whatever, you'd black out at like 7.2, 7.3. Well, there are these stories. It's crazy where they just kept going. So the guys would pass out at 7.3 and they'd take them to 12. Okay. So this is early days of this program. And these guys, they'd take them up to 12, they'd bring them back down, and these guys would wake up and they would report that they were above their bodies. They were outside of their bodies, looking down on their bodies. And one of these guys said he literally walked back to his office above himself. And when he got to the office after a period of time, he snapped back into his body.
Oh, wow.
And one of the things they were talking about, and this was reported many, many times by these guys that went up to 12 Gs. And I thought it was fascinating, right? Like, wow, this is crazy. A physical spinning of you separating yourself from this. And it made me think, there's all these stories of trauma and of people, especially in car accidents, like getting hit really hard, and having massive G forces, and all these reports of them saying, yeah, I saw myself above my body. And to have the military talk about this is hilarious to me. But it also kind of made me think, okay, we're so snapped into this meat suit and we're looking around in this context. And I'm thankful I woke up this morning that I could have this conversation with you. But I'm also recognizing that this is a context. And you said many, many times, why did God create? Because we are locked into this system unless we're going to spin ourselves around. And it's so short, Steve. And here you just went to a funeral, and I think about my dad and all these things, and it's so temporary, even though we hold on to it as if it's all there is. And we talked about it the other day. So what I'm trying to kind of square in all this stuff is Jesus is sovereign over all things, and he is accomplishing what he's going to accomplish. He set out from the beginning, whether it's in the garden and going, hey, remove this cup from me. He's like, hey, this is what we planned ahead of time. Let's go through with it up to this moment right now.
Yeah.
That it's in a context that is not the whole story. And I feel like so many people have been told that this is the best it's going to get. They don't have the context that, hold on a second, maybe this is, and all of the things that I read in the scriptures about, like the demons going into the pigs or whatever it may be. How should we, we hold on to this life so much, and we think of it as so concrete. And I feel like what we're starting to learn is that it's all kind of leading to the same spot, in my opinion, which is there's so much more to the story than we know. What are your what is your encouragement? Because there's people who are dealing with cancer, there's people who are dealing with all kinds of ailments and issues and fear as it relates to death and to the temporariness of this life. What would you say to people like that are dealing with that stuff?
Oh, wow.
I know that's a lot.
Well, and because every situation is unique unto itself. So it's trying to offer a general context of perhaps approaching it without making it so specific to the individual situation. I think of Mike, for example, on the stream.
Yeah.
Mike went through a very, very specific situation that, yeah, a lot of people have gone through, and they could have given Mike all kinds of input and thoughts about it, but not a single one of those would have applied to him in a very specific way, except for his personal experience, which he then has talked about, here and there. So general idea, without attempting to be so specific that it tries to define what an individual will experience, because there is no substitute for the individual experience.
Yeah.
Mike will carry that with him forever. With that kind of a little bit of a caveat, it's the same thing. A person has to be interested. If a person is not interested beyond the everyday part of living, then none of this is really going to make much sense. But so let's talk about it in the context of somebody who's really interested. One time, Jesus came to me and he said, I want you in the group that you're working with here, which was a computer business, software. It was a software development business. He said, I want you to put together a job description for God. You want us to put together a job description for you? Yeah. Well, how do we do that? Well, if I told you, then you wouldn't be putting it together. So I want you to put it together. I want you to take some time as a group to think through this. If you are the one, you guys are building job descriptions all the time when you hire people for a role. So God is a role. The supreme being put together. If you were the one charged with hiring the supreme being, what would the job description look like? It took us a month. Every day for an hour, specific, and then talking about it throughout, we just sit down and just start writing stuff down. And then we took a period of time to look at it and evaluate it. And this thing probably took us, I don't think I'd be exaggerating to say 4 to 6 months by the time we got it all put together. And one of the attributes of God is that he would have to be the same regardless of the situation or circumstance or attitude. That the situation, circumstance, or attitude would have no bearing, have no effect on his position and person of God. Let's think about that for a minute. I don't know what it does for you, but that mere thought started answering a whole lot of questions for me. What we want God to do is to remove all of the adverse experiences in our lives so that we can be spared the difficulty and trauma that particular experience produces in our lives. And from God's point of view, it is no. Once you do that, you deprive them of experiencing me in that situation for who I actually am. You talk about a friend who went through that very thing. He went through cancer that the rest of us would be terrified about, would run from, and he says, nope, it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. Why? What I would offer is because he experienced God in the center of that thing most traumatic, and it paled in comparison to him. So that's one thing I would offer, that the nature of God and the person of God, the role and position of God, is that he is bigger than any situation we can ever find ourselves in. And we only discover that when we enter into a situation that is way bigger than us. It's at that point we start seeing the massive nature that he possesses that dwarfs anything that we talk about or can experience. Paul calls it momentary light affliction. He saw that contrast. And until you see that contrast, you can't experience it. Mike experienced it. He talks about it. I'm getting ready to get my chest cracked open. I don't have any idea what's going to happen. I don't even know if I'm going to wake up. What's going to happen with my Maitland if I don't wake up? What this, what that, what the other thing? And what did he experience? If he were to tell you the story, he felt this amazing presence of Jesus with him that dwarfed all of that. So that's the first thing. No matter what the circumstance or situation, God is bigger than that, and he'll show it to you if you're interested in seeing it. The next thing I would probably offer is that came out of this experience of putting together the job description is that whatever he created had to achieve exactly what he intended, which meant that any circumstance, situation, power, force that encountered it, that his creation had to be self-cleansing. It had to be able to deal with that, to experience it, deal with it, and then cleanse and purge it out of the system. It had to be self-cleansing. Well, guess what? I've experienced that in my own life. We mentioned it just a little bit ago. Probably everybody here that's listening has experienced it. When you follow him, guess what happens? You start experiencing this self-cleansing dynamic. Okay? In the religious world, you have to go jump through all these hoops. You got to repent. And some of the key words are, repent, study, change your behavior, do all of these various things. Well, in the context of the New Testament Bible, the Pharisees were the supreme examples of following that behavioral pattern. And Jesus called them whitewashed sepulchres. No, follow him, come in alignment with how he has built his creation to work. Learn how to live in it with him, and guess what you'll experience? This self-cleansing dynamic. And it happens just as you hang out with him and follow him. You're not trying to change things. You're not trying to, no, the only change in your behavior is I want to hang with you. I don't know how to do it. Would you teach me how to do that? I don't know the first thing that I'm doing, but I know you do. Yeah, I got this, Steve. Let's go. And this stuff starts falling off like crazy. As the junk falls off, then the next thing that happens is you begin to start seeing things as they really are. Paul's experience, the Apostle Paul's experience, is when Jesus knocked him off his horse. He simply encountered him, knocked him on his keister, and then Jesus simply asked him a question. How long are you to keep kicking against the goats here? Don't you know you're going somewhere? Have you not considered that the path you are on has purpose? And every time you try to deviate from that, I have provided for you guardrails, goats, that will keep you in check, that will keep you going in the right direction so that you don't end up running off the cliff. And those goats have brought you right here to me in this moment. And here's how that looks. Boom. Knocks him on his hand. Not to hurt him, but to demonstrate the enormity of the person he was dealing with. That this path was not without purpose. What happened to him? He crawled away some other place, could not see. Why? This is the way the Bible describes it, is the scales that were on his eyes. Guess what was happening to his body? It was self-cleansing. And Jesus sent Simeon to him and said, hey, go pray for this boy. I've got things for him to do. I mean, the intricacy with which Jesus is involved in his creation and his people is mind-numbing when you actually experience it. There is no detail so small that he is not intimately aware of it. And by the way, interested in it. So the traumas that we experience, the shortness of time that we live, the way he described it to me is I created the material world to be a disposable commodity. I can go through all of the experiences to train my man without having my man have to carry the baggage of that for eternity. Wow. What? Now there's a guy who's thinking ahead. I'm building a portion of my creation that can be disposed of, because the lesson learned is far, far exceeds the value. And I need there to be a place where he can freely fail, because that failure is what produces in him the eternal that I'm building in my man, the disposable commodity. Fascinating thing. I've actually written about this a little bit. I mentioned it in the past, but it struck me so profoundly. If we buy into the basic idea that the creation is about 7,000 years old, then the maximum, if we live to be adults for 70 years, the maximum that we can experience of God's plan is equivalent to an 8-month-old baby. I mean, pause and think about that for a second. If it is correct that the material creation is 7,000 years old, the maximum I can experience of his plan is equivalent to an 8-month-old baby. Well, how much counsel would you get? Would you pursue from an 8-month-old? By the way, on anything. If somebody's involved in computer science for 8 months old, how much advice do you get from them? Do you seek from them? Okay? And so you can apply that anywhere. So this very short period of time is constructed in a disposable environment where there is a liberty to experience these fundamental dynamics of life that we can then take hold of that prepare us for the next step, because that are no problem to us, because the whole creation is designed to be self-cleansing. And God is bigger than every bit of it. He dwarfs it all. Well, once you get a hold of that kind of an idea, it's like, wow. Okay, Jesus, let's do this thing. You've thought way more about this than I could ever begin to think about it. And it's blowing my mind just a little bit that you're sharing. I did not learn a bit of this in Sunday school or sitting in the pew.
No.
So I don't know if that answers your question, but
It does.
It's the kind of stuff that.
Well, I like asking you these questions because I get an answer that I don't expect, and that's the best part. It's interesting as you think about training. You mentioned this. I've often felt like, because of the nature of the timing of this, that it feels a lot like a test at times, and it feels like boot camp for a part of the time. And I've told you this before. My birth mother was schizophrenic. At least that's what people called her, right? Because she heard voices, and it was a really weird thing, right? Because not everybody's got that kind of mental illness in their family. And of course, I didn't see her for 20 some years of my life, so my dad kind of protected us from that, and that was kind of the things of that time. But when I got to know her as an adult, she would often say to me, "Hey, if you need a new body, I know where you can get one." She told me that 100 times, and it was real fun because I treated everything she said as if it were true, and she kind of got a kick out of that because most people didn't. But what's interesting is whatever time period you think this place has been around, whether you think it's billions of years or you think it's 7,000 years, the time is limited, and it's been shortened even more because the Bible would talk about Methuselah, and I ain't him.
No.
And it's interesting, the grace of that, because on one hand, this self-cleansing, this is the first time we've ever talked about self-cleansing. Not one time have you talked about self-cleansing before. So this is new for me. And you think about the very structure of things, of redeeming and everything from just the growth of things, right? Just like how they cleanse. I think about having food poisoning, right? Thinking about breaking a bone or getting cut or whatever it may be. The system and structure of all of this, that it has that component to it. And it's interesting how you reflect on your life, and he reminds you, hey, you fought the lion and the bear, and you see purpose in it. And I think that that's something that, if I were to pass along to my kids or to anybody, is there's a story being told, and it is one of self-cleansing, and it's one that is redeeming things. And it's like, I think about all the things that others have done and that I've done. I think about people who've gotten into addiction, right? And you lose hope to a certain point where you're just like, I got to numb this because I can't handle it. It's just too difficult for me, so I'm going to kind of numb myself to this experience. And it's really interesting that no matter the circumstances, and I think that's what I'm taking from this whole time with you today, is there's nothing that he's unaware of. There's nothing that he can't handle. There's nothing, and there's been allocation in the created process for these things. I was thinking about trauma. I have a buddy who's a trauma surgeon, and one of the things he said is, people come into the emergency room yelling and hollering, right? And if you've ever had, I don't know if you've ever had your back thrown out. I had my back thrown out one time. I could not get to the bathroom. And I literally cried. I was in such pain. I needed to use the bathroom, and I couldn't get to the bathroom. And it was the most hopeless, painful feeling. And what he said is, he's like, when you know how the body works, you actually are worried when there's no sound. And it's really interesting as you assess you do triage and you're trying to understand what's really going on, is that pain is actually a wonderful protection mechanism that's been built into the creation for us to understand where we're at.
Yes.
And it's, and I think about the things that we fear, right? We fear the trauma, we fear those things, but it's interesting when we've had those things happen, it's almost like there's provision in that moment. The fear is the anticipation of it. It's not the actual experience of it. It's that there's actual provision. Like, you would become unconscious if you had shock for a reason. It protects you. I don't know where I heard this story, but the gazelle, right? The gazelle that's in the clenches of the lion's mouth, it will, you'll have such shock and it'll pass out and go limp. And what's crazy is that the system will turn back on and enable you to get away. Like, whatever it is chemically, to escape the mouth of the lion in a moment. That it's like a protection mechanism that's been built into the very structure, which is that, I could say, is partially that self-cleansing thing. And when you start looking into that stuff, and then you go, wow, this was all created for a reason and a purpose. This isn't accidentally here. And then I just put all these pieces together, right? All right, he's a father, and he's available. And just like you as a father, with the right intentions and loving your son, he can come to you at any time. And to think that, wow, it's so interesting. I'll just have to do audio for a minute. How interesting is it that he would give us the opportunity to experience it in this way. I'm just it's like it constantly is inviting you, I suppose. That's the thing that I see it doing. It's constantly inviting you to go deeper and to probe it more, into. So it's very encouraging to me, Steve. I mean, that's really, really helpful because, we're always dealing with something, and I'm sure people that watch this are dealing with stuff as well.
Yeah, and it's not intended to minimize the trauma or diminish the severity of what a person is going through. It is to invite, encourage, to seek a different perspective about it. I mean, you talk about all the time, your friend. He came to that different perspective. And when he did, he passed that on to you, and it made such an impact on you, you passed it on to others.
Yeah.
Now, is that for the purpose of diminishing the severity and the importance and difficulty that a person is going through? No, it's to actually provide them with some opportunity to seek a different perspective about their situation. I talked about my own situation where I was essentially, given a death sentence, through the diagnosis of, kidney cancer, renal carcinoma. The guy said, if it's that big, it's probably spread all through your body. And so I'm sorry to say that. But I would start making plans. Let me tell you what, that is not flipping good news.
No.
That's not something you say, hey, honey, guess what I heard today? Let's break out the champagne.
Yeah.
No, man. But for me and where I was, the way that Jesus walked me through that, and I described it on some of the other, episodes. And one of the other episodes is that, okay, Jesus, is this a sickness unto death? Is it over? Because that's what I'm being told. Is it over? Do I need to start putting everything in order? Because I'm not going to be here much longer. It's my time. Well, that can be an inquiry for which you have no expectation of an answer. But I had been hanging with him long enough to know that if I asked the question, he was going to answer it. And so the challenge for me was, Steve, do you have the courage to ask me about anything that is occurring in your life? Can you take the most difficult thing that you are experiencing? Will you exclude me from that, or will you inquire of me about it? And guess what was behind that? Steve, will you partner with me in that?
Yeah.
Will you allow me to partner with you in it? Well, it was a whole lot easier to not ask the question, because then I wasn't confronted with either question. But it was no. All right, if this is it, if this is what is true, then let's live what's true, and then respond appropriately, whatever that might look like.
What year was that?
2009.
Wow. And here we are.
No, Steve, it's not a sickness unto death. We've got more work to do. Your body is in trouble. It does need help. We do need to minister to it and care for it right now. And that's what we're going to do. But once we're done, you'll revive, you'll be back, and we'll continue the work. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And I'll never forget the doctor coming in the next day after that surgery with this big, huge smile on his face. He said, I have some really good news for you. I said, what's that? He said, you're cured. I'm cured. What does that mean? I mean, do I need to come back and get radiation? Do I need chemotherapy? Because before I went to sleep, I was thinking I had, cancer that was spread all the way through my body. And he said, no, it wasn't a cancerous growth. It's known as an oncocytoma tumor. It was extremely large. We did have to take the kidney, but you'll make a full recovery. And so here we are, 30 episodes later.
That's right. Wow, Steve. And it should be an encouragement. I learn something every time, and then I'll rewatch these and I'll learn something else. Here's the big takeaway for me already is I don't know that I'm including him in everything. I mean, I have this conversation a lot of times when I'm driving with him. I'm like, only you have the authority to speak to me, right? And I'm catching that piece of it, right? So I'm having this discussion to say I'm identifying when I'm listening to, when the ports are open and when I'm listening to alternative stuff, right? Like, this is not from you, and I need to not listen to this, right? Like the lies about circumstances or about me or about the situation. But what's interesting about this is it's almost like he'll speak if spoken to in some respects, right? Giving you the choice to go. And I think a lot of times the way that I've been trained is that, you don't want to bother the king with this. And what you're saying is, no, he's a loving father. And whatever you want to talk about, he's willing to talk about. And early on, you said it was like sitting on the end of the bed with the grandkids.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, I don't know that I have included him in everything. And it sounds like to me, you've spent more time including him in all this stuff. And it's interesting. It's like, well, you have not because you asked not. And it makes me think about so many things in scripture that talk about, well, how would someone know what you're struggling with if you don't tell them? And not to say that God would know all those things in advance, certainly would, but it's in a way with, with regular people, just with the relationships that you have in this life is like, how would I know that you're struggling unless we talk about it? Or there's some evidence of it. So thank you. That's helpful. That's very helpful.
Matt, we are smack in the center of a tipping point. And these things happen throughout creation, throughout time and history. There comes a point at which a decision needs to be made by a group of people that will then set the course of their community life going forward. You asked me I don't know if it was the last episode or the one before that, about what was going on with Israel and Hamas, and talking about how certain people don't think that that the Israeli government is really, the Jewish, the true Jewish people, that they're actually Edomites, and yada yada yada. What do I think about all that? And we brought it back to this very personal dynamic with God. Israel means he who contends with God, and that contending is either positive or negative. We're either going to contend with him as a partner, or we're going to contend with him as an adversary. Either way. Okay. Well, one would be the Israel who contends in the line of Abraham. The other contends in the conversation of the Edomites in the line of Esau. Who saw his inheritance as worth less than a momentary provision.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we condemn them all the time and within the religious circles, but there is something to be learned there. Well, we are in a time where the kingdom of darkness is pulling out all the stops, is no longer operating in darkness where its greatest power is. It is becoming overt in its intention and expression. And what it's going to do, it's going to challenge our sovereign appointment over the earth. And just like the serpent did with Eve in the garden, which was to gain possession and control of what God had given to her through the mechanism of transaction, the same thing is happening now. And we're going to be called upon, and are being called upon, to give our answer. Are we going to continue to operate in the manner that we have been created and designed to operate on the earth, or are we going to give that to another? Well, what is the Economic Forum saying?
Yep.
You'll own nothing and be happy about it.
Yep.
Well, did they just come up with that idea?
Yeah, good point.
I have a nephew who's an analyst with the federal government. We had pretty extensive conversation last week. He cannot talk about the things that he is entrusted to deal with. And he said, Steve, what's hilarious from where I sit is all of these theories about what the government is doing and how the government is trying to confiscate, and how the government this, that, and the other thing. He said, I'm here to tell you, we're not smart enough to do that. He said, if you operated where I operate, you'd say, crap, we have a hard time tying our own flipping shoes.
Yep.
What makes you think we can do this? Well, I get that entirely. But that does not mean that there is not a force and an intelligence that's not pulling levers and controlling things because we have given them permission to do that.
Yep.
Okay, now why am I saying this? All the things that we talk about over these 30 episodes, these are just not spiritual conversations, at least not from my point of view, and I don't think from yours. This is very, very practical stuff. And our decisions are going to produce not only our reality, future reality, but that of our children. And I would encourage folks, change the way you're making your decisions. Start considering a different way of making them. Okay? I think you'll be happy you did.
Well, the irony of all irony, Steve. So Rat Food himself came in right when you said there was a tipping point, and he said, I know today isn't a Texan stream, but anyone wants some incredible news? All right, after that, we got into some Texas stuff, but what an amazing clip from Steve. And I pulled out some things I wanted to share with you and extrapolate on this. Just every time I revisit any of this content, and if you want to find this content, it's on my channel. It's Right Side Up with Steve Staggs. There are 37 episodes with Steve, and then I've continued it, and we're on episode 45. Okay, so if you want original stuff from Steve, you can go there. My buddy Ray is putting together a tool where you can actually search the actual spoken content. So if you wanted to find an area where Steve said some specific thing, we're going to have a tool eventually where you can literally go in and search it, just like hexsearch.io, which I'm really excited about that. But I wanted to share with you a couple things, and I'm going to go back and we're going to kind of go through this. Just some things I want to point out. One of the things that Steve talked about was this idea of Paul on the road to Damascus, right? Is that, here's Paul. And if you know the story of Paul, who was Saul previously, and he was essentially agreeing and supporting the persecution of Christians and the killing of Christians. And so he says, I was a Hebrew of Hebrews, right? So he was somebody that followed the law, and he was persecuting and basically killing Christians. And you think about it, that's somebody who's diametrically opposed to the cause of Christ, right? And think about, what it talks about in the scriptures about how, we've been enemies of God. And I don't know that everyone kind of sees themselves as enemies of God, but we were. And so Paul is this perfect example of somebody who is an enemy, right? I'm going to kill your people. I'm going to, I'm diametrically opposed to your cause. And what happens is this moment of intervention, right? It's not like, he went to church, right? He was knocked off his horse, right? He was knocked to his butt, and Jesus asked him a question. And I think about that, like while we read this stuff in the scriptures and we think, oh, that was a long time ago and that was at a different time and, God worked differently. Nope, he didn't. Works the same way today. But what was the reason that he knocked him off his horse? And so I want you to put yourself on your own horse for a minute. And I want you to see yourself on a horse and you're going somewhere. And in this case, Paul likely was going to Damascus to do the same thing he was doing before, which was to persecute Christians, right? To stop this thing. To think that, Jesus literally would intercede, right? So he literally was knocked off his horse and blinded, and he heard the voice of Jesus. One of the things that we fundamentally talk about on this podcast is we talk about that Jesus is alive and he speaks. And we talk about how important that the spoken word of Jesus is. And if you think about what the Bible is, it's a testament to the speaking of God, right? There's so much of the Bible that says, and the Lord say, he said this, right? And of course, we even put the words of Jesus in red in some Bibles. But we talk about him coming out of the wilderness. And when he comes out of the wilderness, he's tempted by Satan himself. What does he hear? Satan wants his authority. He says, oh, yeah, basically worship me. And he says, if you're who you say you are, right, prove yourself to me. You could turn these stones into bread. I know you're hungry. And what does Jesus say? He says, man does not live on bread alone, but out of every word that comes out of the mouth of God. So we get established from the mouth of Jesus how he relates to his Father. And he's basically an agent. The Father and I are one. And I only do what I see the Father doing. And I only, the life that I get comes from him speaking to me. Well, we know that it's said that no one comes to the Father except through me. That's what Jesus said. So we have this one who has come, right? Who has died, who has been resurrected, who is the way, the truth, and the life. And we have this model of us going a certain way. And I think in our own physical world, we look at that as, well, I'm going to Damascus to do my thing, just like you might be doing today, driving in a car, doing whatever you're doing. And a lot of times we don't think it's purpose. We just think, well, this is what I got to do next. It's obligation, it's work, it's whatever. But how interesting that the God of all creation, because it says that all things were created for him and by him, that he would interrupt that. He'd knock you off your horse, you'd go blind, and he'd ask you a question. And what would that question be? Why are you doing this? Why are you kicking at the goads? The term goad is not used in the normal vernacular these days, but a goad is essentially a stick that the shepherd would carry. And it had a crook on the end of it and a poker. And it was used as a means to control the speed of the sheep or the animals It was to poke them, to get them going faster, or to slow them down, or to move them in a direction. And so the term in that agricultural kind of world was the fact that, why are you kicking at the goads? And think about what that is. There's so much packed in that one statement. Jesus as a shepherd is carrying this stick, this crook, right? He's basically saying, I guide you. Well, why would I guide you if there wasn't a direction? And this is the most important thing I think I gather from this clip and everything, is that, do you see your life as going in a direction? And so, even though Paul didn't recognize that he was going in a direction that was designed by God, or maybe he did, it was the wrong direction. And it gets interfered with. Why? If you understand what Paul did from the moment that he got knocked off his horse to the end of his life, everything changed. Do you know what the purpose? Paul's the guy who essentially walked around the Mediterranean 4 times, was shipwrecked on Malta on his way to Rome. Do you realize what a big deal that was? Like, his whole life changed for a purpose. But what Jesus was saying to him is, why are you kicking at the goads? Meaning, I've been directing your path this whole time. And of course, I'm going to intervene, knock you off your horse, make you blind, put scales on your eyes, and I'm literally going to transform you because I have work for you to do. You and I are no different than Paul. No different whatsoever. He's a guy just like we are, or a gal. But do you see that? And what's interesting about this is, Steve talked about all this time. This is not a religious thing. This is like, do you understand the context of this whole creation and this whole life? And if you do, you would understand that there is a shepherd, and that shepherd is guiding you the speed, the direction, the path. And what are we doing? We're kicking at the goats. We're kicking at this stick, going, I don't like you pushing me in this direction. I want to go my own way. And what do we see from Paul after that? Oh my goodness. Go find a man on the straight street, right? And the Lord speaks to him about basically taking the scales off his eyes. And then then the rest is history. I mean, then go read the book of Acts. Like, wow. It's amazing that while we're still enemies of God, while we're still doing things that are essentially going our own way, that he's still there. It's the story of the prodigal son, right? He finances our debauchery so that we would understand his nature and character. But you know what? Honestly, this is the thing that is probably the biggest impact of Steve in my life. And it's so hard for me because my mentor is gone as far as physically, but I would keep on learning from him. When I was a kid, I went to Sunday school when I was, I think, 12 or something, middle school age. And I was so put out because the old lady, who I've often said was like 100 years old, she'd make the kids close their eyes and raise their hand if they're not saved. And of course, it was just like, what? Is this really your strategy? I mean, I guess that's like shooting a fish in a barrel. And it put the kids in a really awkward position. And I'm like, is this all there is? Is this what it is? And then as I got, I was in the youth group because I wanted to go play sports with the church, and I wanted to, see the girls. And I went to this youth conclave. It was this conference for kids. And it was all set up to get the kids to come down front and get saved. And, I liked the girl that was there, and I wanted to fit in. And so I did, she was excited. She knew that I was the poor kid, and that, get another notch in your belt. Let's get this kid saved. And so I went down front and I did what they told me to do. And they're like, oh, your life's going to be all different and all changed and all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, great. And so I was like, assuming that I'm a kid. And nothing. I was so disappointed. And there was zero follow-up. It was like they were happy that I got saved, but I didn't sense any difference. And I was like, man, this is phony baloney. That's how I felt. And it wasn't until later. So that was when I was like 12 or 13. And it wasn't until I was 28 years old that I actually realized that this was real stuff. But what's amazing about that is, it's like there's always been a shepherd with a goad. There's always been one with the stick, the crook. I recognize his voice, right? He's guiding our path, and we can choose to not recognize it. We can choose to not walk with him. We can choose to go our own way. But when you come to see that hold on, there's actually a plan and a purpose. And Paul's a perfect example of this. He knew what he had created in Paul, and he knew what his plan was, right? Think of all the preparation that Paul had of being the Hebrew of Hebrews, right? All the preparation, all the knowledge, all of the understanding. Do you think that helped him when he went in and preached the gospel across the Mediterranean? Yeah, you're right, he did. And so you see all of these things. It's this constant redeeming thread through all of our lives. And we see it in this picture. And that's really the point, which I think is absolutely incredible. But one of the things Steve said in that clip, he said, have you not considered the purpose of the plan? Have you not considered that? Hold on, stop for a second. You've been told all your life potentially that you don't matter and you're not important and you're not valuable, or you have been told that. There's a real, you're here for a reason. And I look at Steve passing so suddenly and I go, he made a really good point. Is this a sickness unto death? Well, when it was the kidney thing, it wasn't. But when it was the heart attack thing, it was. But what is real life? Because Todd, who is Steve's son, he spoke at the memorial service for Steve. And he said, don't be sad. And I'm like, everybody's kind of sad. He's like, don't be sad. And he said, this is exactly where my dad wanted to be. He wanted to be with Jesus. So when you think about the statement from Steve of, well, if you think it's 7,000 years, what is 120? What is 72 years or 73 years? It's like an 8-month-old. And I'll make this case because this is the thing that probably hit me the most from my time with Steve. You see, he said, when Jesus went up with Peter, James, and John to the Mount of Transfiguration, and the guys saw Moses and Elijah appear, and they saw Jesus conferring with Moses and Elijah on the mountain. Can you imagine what that was like? Like you're with your buddies and Jesus, and he gets transfigured, and he's talking with Moses and Elijah, and you recognize that it's Moses and Elijah. How? I'm not sure. But he's talking with them. That means they're alive. And it says, God is not the God of the dead. He's the God of the living. So we have all this fear that death is this judgment. And here's a guy, Steve, who's basically like, no, this is a reward. And it's honestly, in the context of eternity, it's not real life. In fact, you can spin yourself at 12 G's and you're outside your body. I think most people that are operating in this world do not consider the fact that they are a spiritual being having a physical experience. But that's the story. That's what's happening. But we're so locked into the meat suit and we're so locked into the context of all this stuff that it's hard for us to relate to the fact that I've got all this fear. I've got all this stuff. I don't think that there's a purpose for my life. I don't think that there's any semblance of this. Everyone tells me that it's an accident and I'm a descendant of a monkey and I'm no different than my dog. Well, folks, that's the lie. That's the lie. Are you perpetuating that lie? Because there's so much evidence, if you follow him, that it's not true. And so since I've been 28 years old, I've been seeing God wink at me. And I know the only one has been winked at so many times. The God winks. And it's amazing that when I was in, middle school, what I think I was so sad about was the fact that, what do you do after this? If you say, Jesus, I'm interested in you and you want to take this pathway and I want to follow you and, I want to hang with the dude, as Steve said. He's like, hey, I want to hang with you, dude. Like, I want to partner with you. I want to go your way. I want to, and, Steve would say, and, the reason that God created was so that his man would rule and reign with him in his nature and character. And he said, you want to change things. You got to change your decision making. Well, that's it. It's making our decisions different and literally being interested in, I'm interested in the plan that you have for my life. I really am. And what's really cool about it is I had a really important phone call that I was preparing for. And I literally asked Jesus, I said, "Hey, what do I need to know about this call and talking to this really important person?" And it was silent. There was nothing. I didn't get any sense of anything. I'm like, are you there? Hello? Hello? And he said, basically, Matt, I thought we were going to do this together. And I was like, oh, so you mean we're going to do this together? Yeah, that's what we're going to do. Do you know what kind of confidence and what kind of patience and what kind of like, that's the thing that's amazing is the byproduct of walking with him in this in a very practical way is the peace that transcends all understanding. And it's like, wow, so you give rest and your yoke is easy and your burden's light. I go, wow, I didn't know. I thought I had to muscle this thing. No, you're kicking at the goads, man. You're kicking at the goads, Paul. You're kicking at the goads. Insert your name here. And it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And so what I'm so thankful for and what I want to continue to promote on this channel on Fridays at 11 is the fact that Jesus is alive and he speaks, and that this is really everything. That the Bible is an account of that, and then translated into English a bunch of different ways. But the living Jesus he's fundamental, and he's still alive and he still speaks. But the lie is essentially that we've created country clubs. A lot of the church, at least in the West and in America, has become a country club. It's become a place of membership. And I sit here, somebody's sitting in my pew. Folks, this is not what it's about. The ecclesia, the called out ones, are the ones that are interested in what Jesus has to say. And I think a lot of this is, well, you just need to study more. You just need to pray more. Well, hang on. No, the whole purpose of him creating is that we would do this together. So you're saying we do this and we go with the flow together? And you saw Steve doing that so many times. When you'd ask him a question, he would look up and he would literally, you could tell in his mind, he's like, hey, Jesus, what do you think about this? And I think one of the greatest practical things that I always longed for was somebody to tell me, how do I do this thing? How do I do it? Like, can you share with me how you do it, Steve? And he said, sure, I'd be happy to do that. Finally, somebody who is saying, well, this is how it works. And how amazing is that? Because it's not like, oh, well, you've got to go through this hoop and you got to jump through this thing and you can only do it on Wednesdays of leap year at 8 a.m. No, he's accessible at all times. And in fact, he's attentive to your every interest. But you know what? I was being honest with them then. I'll be honest with you now. I think I act as if the small things in my life that I care about, I really shouldn't concern him with. He's a big guy and he created all this stuff. He can't be interested in these little things. He can't be interested in, my financial situation. He can't be really interested in these little things or I'm having this pain or how am I going to deal with this thing? Or, hey, I really need to lose some weight or I'm really struggling with my diabetes or whatever. And he's like, no. And Steve said, I've hung with the dude long enough to know that if I ask him a question, he's going to answer me. Are you there with Jesus? I'm still working at it. And I'm being honest with you, it's a process, but I'm just so thankful that the creator of the universe is like, hey, I'm accessible. And in fact, I get a kick out of the NASA guys that spin people at 12 Gs. We would never do that today, but they had to get to the moon. So they're like, let's just spin people. And to see that this body separation, it just is a reminder that a big part of this life is protection for us. But there's a promise of an integration in the future, meaning it becomes whole. We're in this place where we see all kinds of evil. We see all kinds of things that aren't right. We see things that are all upside down. And I think what the amazing thing about this is we look at the early church, and in Acts 2:42, it says that, and I'm paraphrasing, that they committed themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. And when anyone had any need, they would sell stuff and help them out. Well, what does that look like? It looks like a group of people who are in community with each other. And they shared life together and food together and prayer together and encouraged each other. And when there was a challenge, they helped each other. What does that sound like? Well, that sounds like kind of a good thing. And those are decisions that people made. But why did they make those decisions? Because they understood how much they had been forgiven. And when you realize that, there's stories in the Bible about a guy who is forgiven his debt. And then he immediately turned around and went and beat the guy who owed him money. And it's a story of teaching us that when you come to recognize how much you've been rescued out of the fire, you've been knocked on your keister off your horse, you've been blinded, and the Lord Jesus spoke to you and said, I have work for you to do. Paul's no different than us. What is the work that he has to do for you? The question is, are you interested in it? Are you interested in having that experience with him? It's not through me, it's not through Steve. We're just testifying to the fact that it's available. But the common thing you're being told is he's dead, he's far away, he's historic, and he's not interested in you. And that's not, universally told, but that's it. But then you're facing all of the other stuff, which is the complete secular view. And that secular view is, well, you're the descendant of a monkey. You're just a gorilla. And you think about it, it's like hard to square those things. And then you might have been raised by parents that abused you. You may have been, self-medicating to the point of complete distraction. You may have been doing DMT and seeing, cubic jokers. There's all kinds of entities and things that you've been seeing. And to have someone like Steve say, hey, there's a practical way you can journey through this life. And it's not by following Steve Staggs. It's by following Jesus because he's alive and he speaks. Well, okay. I mean, there's some people who might want to split some hairs with me and they might want to say, you know what? He sent us the Spirit of God, right? We know that he said, I'm sending a counselor to you because he was like, I'm out of here. I'm going to send you one who's going to remind you of everything I said. Said. Faith comes through hearing. Well, what are we hearing? Is it faith comes through hearing of like just sounds? No, this is the word. What is the word? It became flesh and dwelt among us. The Bible is screaming a spoken word of God to you. And it's not just ink on a page. It's this journey with him every single second. I love to watch Japanese pottery being made. What a weird thing, right? I love to watch YouTube videos about it. And I see some of these masters, and I like to watch them, how they throw pots. And they've been doing this for 60 years or something. And I just literally imagine that whenever we're creating like the Creator did, whether it's a piece of pottery or not, we can do it with him. And that's what he's saying. If you code stuff, you can do it with him. If you draw stuff, you can do it with him. If you work somewhere, you can do it with him. And you've run into people who have done it with him. I met a woman who worked at a convenience store. And I'm going to tell you, she worked at that convenience store with Jesus. And I knew it. I want to be like that. I want to do this stuff with him. And when I have at least tried to fumble my way through attempting to do that, the whole thing opens up and I see the purpose and he shows me, hey, Matt, you fought the lion and the bear, just like David. And then I say to him, hey, Jesus, what giant do you want me to slay? Saying the same thing to you. Question is, will you ask him? Are you interested? And not everybody is. Folks, I run into people all the time. It's like, I have no interest in that at all. But this isn't some religious thing. You like join a church or something. No, this is the actual context of how it's done. But so many people over time have wanted to build in a system and kind of get credit for it. I've been watching a lot online about this eclipse that's coming up. And there's so many people within the kind of Christian world who are using this event to essentially get engagement from people on social media. And you know how Steve said, the more you hang out with them, the more you see things for what they are. And I just see it for what it is. People are using these things, and it was warned about in scriptures. If you're going to pray, don't go out into the streets and pray real loud with a bunch of words, right? You got your reward in full. That's why it says, "Don't let the left hand know what the right hand's doing when you're giving." The same thing is true here. Is that once you see it, you can't unsee it. And what is that? The journey with Jesus is one that is personal and is jam packed with purpose. But there's so many people out there that I think have represented the name of Jesus in a way that completely turns you off. And I would say, me too, me too. But I assure you that it's not being represented the way he would ideally represent it. And that's something that's available to you personally. And I'm just I'm just so thankful for it because it's so refreshing. It's rather than saying, you got to go through my program to get to God, is me being a middleman. I don't have a program for you. And that's the beauty of this relationship with Steve. Hey, Jesus is alive and he speaks. Want to know what he has to say? Ask him. Well, I don't know how to hear from him. Like, how do you know if it's him? What's your intent? Well, my intent is to hear from him. Okay. There's the first. Are you interested? Yeah. Then ask him. It's his job to teach you. Ask him, hey, teach me how to hear from you. You know what's amazing? Since I've done that, I've not had an audible word from the Lord. I haven't had him say, but here are the lottery numbers. It has not happened that way. But I'm going to tell you the insight, the wisdom, the clarity I've had around things, and it's accompanied with the currency of God, which is peace that transcends all understanding. And what I've realized is that a part of this is having peace or no peace, but it's discernment. And you're like, wow, this is a real gift and it's real stuff. But you can't experience it. No one can convince you of it. It's not an intellectual thing, it's an experiential thing. You got to be knocked off your horse and in some cases blinded for you to see it. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest today he's been here before and he's probably one of the most popular guests. And with 127 people watching, let's welcome ZZ Tesco. What's up, buddy? Hey, you're on mute. You're on mute. Dude, you've been watching this for a little while. I've been seeing you in the green room, and I know that you probably have something to say about this. So I'll let you get yourself unmuted. But for those of you who don't know Mr. Ray and I are in the same office right now, and he and I talk about this stuff all the time. And the whole time I met Steve, every time I spend time with Steve privately, I'd get off the phone and Ray would come into my office and we would literally talk for another 2 hours about what Steve had talked about with me. And then, of course, we started doing the streams. And what's amazing is then every time we would do the streams, we'd end up talking about this all week. I hope that's something that can be encouraging to you because a lot of this stuff is really, I don't know if it's counterintuitive or what it is, but it's sometimes shocking to your system. But what I love about it is its simplicity, is that there's not like a bunch
Yeah.
of rules, right? Rick, what's up, buddy?
Hello, I'm here.
Yay. So you've been watching for a while. Any comments or thoughts that have come to mind?
To be honest, I'm a little undone right now. And the reason why I say that is, well, so, about this time, so my wife has to go drop off a gift. And so she calls a few minutes ago, and that's kind of why my audio was messed up, because then it switches over to my phone. And I just said, yeah, he said, Matt's doing a stream. We're listening to Steve right now. He's talking about the fact that the stuff that we're going through, no matter what it is, why are we kicking against the goads? Like, why are we kicking against the things that Jesus is moving us around for? And if he's moving us around, he's got a direction for us to go that he wants for us to be able to learn and to work through. And sometimes it's small things, sometimes it's big things, but we fight against him all the time. And she was like, okay, that blows my mind away. She goes, thank you, Steve.
Yeah.
And she was so grateful, to be able to hear that, because when I listen to Steve talk about these things, and I hope that all of you guys do too, is that I'm in the back of my mind, I'm a little skeptical, but also hearing it going, I want it to work that way. Like, I want to understand how to engage with Jesus in this practical way that he talks about. and it's really cool because I'm asking in the back of my mind, Jesus, is this right? Is this the way things work? I can see why. Okay, I really appreciate this perspective on this because I can see how different it is than the way that I normally operate. But I want more of it. When he talks, well, I just been walking with the dude, and I'm like, okay, I want to walk with Jesus in a way where everything I do is with Jesus, and it makes me go, okay, if I've got these crazy things to figure out, with code or project management or other things, and I it calms my spirit and my heart to know that I can do it with Jesus and do it in a way that honors him and his nature and character, and my mind is blown.
Well, and it's such a
So
foreign thing. I have to recognize the fact that, if you don't understand this and you haven't experienced it, it sounds crazy, right? This idea, oh yeah, I'm gonna code with Jesus, right? It sounds almost like goofiness. But what's interesting is I can relate to the fact that, this is where he takes you, right? And he's taken me into this because I think what I did was I think it's like I feel like I tipped him. I feel like, when you're like, you got good service from somebody and you tipped God, you're like, hey, I'll give you a tip. I feel like that's kind of how I treated him. I kept him at arm's length. He's wanted to be there, but he's been patiently at arm's length. And it's like, hold on a second. So you're saying I can include you in all this stuff, and honestly, you'll have something to say about it. And probably the best thing Steve ever said to me was the number one question he asks is, Jesus, how do you see this? And think about this for a second. Let's say you're dealing with something in code that's difficult, or let's say you're dealing with something with a child or with a wife or whatever it is that you're dealing with. I'm going to just encourage you, if you're out there listening, the next time you're facing something, just ask the question. You don't have to go to church and kneel down. Hey, Jesus, how do you see this? And then expect to hear something. One of the things Steve said is, start asking those questions. He said he called it the 24 to 72 hour rule. And I think there's some folks in the chat that will relate to that, Carter being number one. But there's something that happens and you're like, you ask for this stuff, be ready to hear. And it's not like, like I said, audible, but you will see the connection to these things that you ask. And you're like, hold on. Well, we talk about prayer, I think, in a real kind of loose way. We're like, well, yeah, sometimes the answer is prayer and sometimes he doesn't. But hang on a second. I want to be changed to understand his perspective. And if you really boil down what prayer is, that's what it is. It's that I would be changed to have his perspective. So why am I, instead of telling God what he needs to do, you need to heal so-and-so and you need to do this, why don't I say, hey, how do you see this situation? And what is my role, or what do you want me to do? And help me understand how to, and that's really interesting. I don't think I've approached that. I might say, I pray for peace in Israel or something, right? I've never said, hey, Jesus, how do you see this Israel Hamas thing? Like, and you think about that, that's profound. How do you see this? And, it says without faith, it's impossible to please God because you have to first believe that he exists and rewards those who earnestly seek him. Well, the whole operative word is earnestly seek. All right. Okay. And he gives you the faith to be able to endure it or to understand it. And it's so counterintuitive. And we've been taught, it feels like this other way that Steve would say is shooting blanks. I'm going to stop shooting blanks, man. And, if I experience, and I don't feel like I'm a neophyte at this, is if I'm feeling the peace that transcends all understanding, if I'm having less fear, if I'm having, more peace, something's working, right? Because if anything before, I was having way more anxiety, and you know that better than anyone. So
it's true. When this whole word is doing things, we say, well, of course I'm doing things with Jesus.
of course,
He's my
because
friend.
you're a good Christian, right?
Well, but as I was, me that my communication skills are very limited. And so it takes me a long time to try to get something out. And usually I'll say something stupid first that comes out and then have to figure out why I said that, what I meant when I said it, and then try to communicate what I meant to everyone later on.
Yeah.
But when my wife called and I was like, "Yeah, this is what I'm doing. We're gonna stream. I'm in the back room and just waiting to go on." She's like, "Okay." I'm like, "Well," I mentioned this thing about Steven, and it was like the most clear communication I could have had about what Steve was talking about. And I was like, "Man,"
And it
and she
translated.
she was well, and what she heard was, um, Jesus cares about the intimate details of your life, probably way more than you do, but we're not doing things with him and allowing him to work in these situations. And no matter what it is, I want to throw my fit and not do what he's asking me to do, or I don't want to go through this situation, but realize that this situation is a gift from God too, no
Mm.
matter what it is. And she brought up a few examples. Um, but what it's amazing. One thing's really cool that she brought up is we're reading through the Bible, right? And we're in Exodus and or Leviticus, and it's talking about what do you do when you have leprosy, and then you're cured of leprosy. You can't just cure yourself of leprosy. So it's kind of an odd thing. Like, why of all the things in there? Now, leprosy, probably people go back and say, well, maybe that was a handful of different ailments that kind of all get lumped into one thing because it shows boils on the skin or whatever. It does certain things to your skin. But then they have to go back to the high priest and show the high priest, and he has a certain ceremony that he's supposed to go through, where he touches the blood here, and on his right big toe, and on the tips of your thumbs, and it's weird. It's like that's basically to pronounce that now you're clean. Okay, but why? And then you fast forward 2,000 years or 1,500 years, and Jesus comes, the only the only person who can literally heal your leprosy like that. So when he comes on the scene, he heals these lepers. Why do these lepers keep coming up to him? People with leprosy, and maybe the disease was there to show that he has power over things that no one else had power over, but he wanted to take the people through that. So then the leper has to go to the priest, and the priest has to do this ceremony. But why the priest? Couldn't God have just made another class of people called doctors back then and said, go to the doctor? He's going to do that. No, he had to go to the priest because the priest is the one who read the scriptures, and he would know that when those things happen, the Messiah is here. And it's like, wow, so God has a purpose in every little detail, whether it's putting blood on the big toe or the thumb or something else. And then and so when I'm going through these things and I'm like, I don't understand what's going on. I want this or I want that. And God's like, stop kicking against me. You want to do it with me? No, I'm not interested in that yet. You want to do it with me? No, I'm too humble. Too humble, God. No. I have to do my churchy stuff over here. Do you want to do it with me? No, I've got to go feed the homeless first, and I'll get back to you when I'm ready. Because I'm doing this for you, God. Here's a tip.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And he's saying, no.
Yeah.
Stop. Do it with me. And I have to surrender my will to his will.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a completely different ballgame.
Remember when we were at the Gen Con conference and Steve was there and somebody asked him in the middle of his talk, he said something about doing something for God. And it was one of the coolest moments. Steve said, God will not be obligated. And I thought about that for a minute. And it was like every time you ask him a question, you like get this counterintuitive answer, which is incredible. But he's like, think about this for a second. This is the creator of the entire universe. This is a guy who's omnipotent, omnipresent, all this, all knowing, sovereign. And you're going to do something for him. Well, if you think about that, if you're going to do something for him, you're kind of obligating him to do something for you, right? Like, look what I did for you. Well, you made this really good point. You don't obligate God to anything. You don't do anything for him. You do it with him. So you got to stop. Because what's interesting is the church that I am a part of, and I go to this church, in all churches, we want to do good stuff, right? And we want to be, what do we say? The hands and feet of Jesus in the world, right? We want, we think about even Paul and going up to, he went to Jerusalem to talk to the apostles, and he's like, hey, I just want to make sure I wasn't running my race in vain. And then they're like separating them because of Jew and Gentile. And he's like, Come on, dude. Okay, well, at least we agree on the poor, you know, and it's like, I'll go my way, you go your way. But at the end of the
Yeah.
day, the same thing is true here. Is like Paul was one of these guys that got knocked off his horse and he did it with Jesus, right? And it's a model for us. It's a model for us to be like, all right, I've been kicking at these goads for a long time. But think about it, the goads only exist because there's a freaking shepherd, dude. He's the one with the goats. He's the one directing you with the stick. And you think about the good shepherd. He's out front. We recognize his voice, and he's got a stick to hit us in the tail with. Why? That's the whole picture. So now you go back to the prodigal son story, and you're like, no wonder the father in that story gave the son his inheritance before he passed, right? He's like, no, I want it now. And he, in his brilliance, goes, you know what, son, you're not going to understand your father's nature and character. Your brother knows it, but you don't. You're going to have to go out and you're going to have to experience what life is like on your own. And I think a lot of people, including myself, you know, I muscled this thing and there were some good results from it. Right? I mean, you
Yeah.
can muscle this thing and you see all the self-help stuff and you see all the people that are like, yeah, you need to manifest this and this and this. They're seeing a form of this thing, right? They're seeing there is a structure to it. There is a method to it. I mean, we joked about it this the other day, you and I talking. I was like, you know, washboard stomachs aren't elusive, right? They just require a lot of effort. And you could have one if you want one, but I don't got one. And but this is different, right? This is a different thing. And so you just like, all right, you know what? I want to do this with you. You're out front. We recognize your voice. You're a good shepherd and you guide us on our path. You give us peace that transcends on understanding. We renew our minds with you to understand how you see things. And when we come to understand your things, we've got peace, but then we're on plan and on purpose. And when Steve said that thing, like, hey, we're the equivalent of an 8-month old, I realized, well, guess what? This isn't all there is. This is a part, but this is not real life. Steve is living real life right now. Moses and Elijah are living real life right now. And I feel like this thin veil, this interface, that heaven and earth will become one. And that these are two sides of the coin. And if you spin yourself up fast, you might be able to get a glimpse of it for a second. But while we're here, I wanna experience this thing with the fullness of the purpose that he had created me to be, and I think that that's pleasing to him. Do you agree, Ray, that it's pleasing to him that you would accomplish the work that he has for you? Because he'll do it. He's going to accomplish it anyway. But how beautiful is it? Like I think about my own kids, and you've told me this many times. There's something so wonderful when a child says, "Hey, Dad, you want to do this together?" And you're like, "Oh my gosh, totally!" You were in the car,
Yeah.
and my daughter asked, "Hey, Dad, you want to play golf on Sunday?" I'm like, "Yes, yes, I do."
Like, okay. Don't have to ask me twice.
That's right. That's right. So I'm gonna finish with this one. One of the most significant things you've ever said to me, Ray, is you said to me years and years ago. You said, and it was like it stuck with me this whole time. You said to me, "Hey, Matt, you got little kids," and he said, "Have your kids ever made art for you?" And I was like, "Yeah, like the finger painting stuff, or they came home from school from like some craft or something." And you said to me, "Matt, is that art?" What did you mean by that? What was the point of you asking me that? Because that has stuck with me forever.
I mean, honestly, I don't know. I mean, in light of the things that Steve said, I stop and I go, I could try to make the biggest picture in the world, but it looks like finger painting compared to what God can do, you know. Um, but to him, it's beautiful because I did it with him.
Yeah.
Like it's God loves the things that we do with him. You know, when we go on our own and try to do our own thing and then come back and
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know that that's the answer you were looking for, but
No, it's a huge part.
I'm
It's so much wrapped up in it, dude. It's so wonderful to me though. It's this idea that if we're made in his image and we're being conformed to his likeness, and that he made us as fathers with daughters and sons. And when they come home with those gifts and they go, Daddy, 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 look what I made for you. And you're like, is that art? No, it's not a Picasso. I didn't say to my daughter, your brush strokes need a little bit more maturing, and a little more linseed oil would have been better here. No, you're like, oh my gosh, this is the greatest thing ever. And you really impressed upon me that
Wow.
the Father is pleased with you, and you're bringing to him your creations, and that, that's the,
Okay.
it was just so beautiful, Ray.
It is, and but here's the beautiful part. The value comes from the relationship between the two of you. Not what it looks like. Not so I can write the best code in the world. It doesn't mean anything if my relationship with Jesus isn't right. And the value, like the real value of it, is what makes it art to me. Is the fact that my daughter made it with me in mind. Her intention was, I'm going to give this to my dad.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow. I'm. It changes how you receive gifts from people because in our family, every gift is thought through, sometimes months in advance.
Yeah.
Of trying to find the perfect thing, and it's all. I attribute all of that to my wife because I'm a doofus when it comes to gifts.
Well,
we laugh at some of the gifts that I bought her.
yeah. Oh, and that's so a dude thing, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Wrong
But
gifts again.
But the beautiful part about it is that it's the value comes from the relationship, and whatever we always say, well, there's so many different avenues we go, Matt, because our hubris as humans either want to push God out and say, I'm doing it my own way, going it on my own, or we play the fake, for lack of a better term, churchy game that says, oh, no, I have to be humble. Everybody around me is humble, so I got to be humble. You can't say, I can't step out for Jesus or do anything because I've got to stay in line and just do what everyone else does. And as long as I'm doing something good over here, then I don't have to do what Jesus really wants me to do over there.
Well, and that false humility is the spirit of the church, right? That false humility is how you become ineffective in that system, right? And you think about this, it's like, well, in Crypto Bigfoot just said, he said, obedience is key. What's interesting about the term of obedience too, is this idea that, hang on a second, you obey someone who is a master. And I think that our perspective of him is that he is some sort of mean father. And what we're saying is, no, he's a loving father. It's not about obedience. It's about together, right? This idea that, a lot of times I think what we do, because we read the Bible and we say, the Bible says this, and you're not doing what the Bible says. That's where this obedience thing comes from. I get it in context of saying, I want to please you. But this idea that without me, you can do nothing, then obedience is actually not in play. And I think the Steve, shared this with me because I said the same thing, Crypto Bigfoot. I was like, it's obedience. I get why we say it because we want to obey, but he's not demanding our obedience, right? He's not demanding anything. He's giving us complete full choice. But what's so great about the reverence that we would have, right? The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, is that when you come to understand the grace that's been extended, it is an act of worship. It's love, right? And it's like a desire to obey. But what's so cool about it is when you approach it, it's not a demand. It's a relationship. It is a journey together. And it's so wonderful because it's true, right? Obedience is key. But what does it say about God if it has to be something that you must obey? No, he doesn't say that at all. You actually, you don't have to obey at all. You can go your own way. You have the free will to do it. But I think the thing that I wanted to say that you've helped me understand is I love it when my kids bring me things. And the question is, are we offering up this stuff? And I was thinking about this. Am I actually taking this very moment to craft this thing with him? And that's the thing that's so beautiful. Look at this. Todd is here. What's up, Todd Beats? The artist, this is the son, the firstborn and only son of Steve Staggs. Love hearing the impact of my father, Steve, and his understanding of God has had on so many of you. Todd, there are 141 people here, most of them on Twitter, but it is just absolutely blown up. And so, Todd, thanks for being here. I spoke about you earlier and your comments about your dad being the place he always wanted to be, and that is with Jesus. And the fact that that's real life, and that's what he talked about on this clip today, was the fact that, you know what, folks, we're like 8-month-olds. This thing is way, way bigger than you think and know. And so the cool thing about it is, and let's finish with this. Let's finish with this. Wow. It's like almost overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
I'm just so thankful that that there's purpose for us. And I'm so thankful that, you know, when the lights go out, it's not over. And I'm, you know, because I look at this and I go, I feel like there's like it's important, like who you are is important, right? And I feel like this life is like relevant. And I drive past the cemetery, I'm like, no one remembers these people. This is a place where they said, do not store up your treasures on earth. And I look at Steve and I go, dude, talk about a guy who stored up some treasures in heaven. You know, this idea that what does it really look like? And that's the upside down world. The upside down world says, when Lambo, it says, get yours at all costs, step on people's heads, step on their neck, get yours over other people. And the beauty of Jesus and Steve is that no, that's not where you store up your treasure. Your treasure is not physical. And I said it before, and I'll say it in front of Todd because I know he's here. Your father, Todd, was the richest man I ever met. Ever. And that's the truth. And I think about that. Like, what if we were to change our decisions, like he said? What if we changed the way we thought? What if we changed the way we made decisions? And what if we did it with him? What would it look like? What would this world look like? And Steve said so many times to me, he's like, hey, Matt, what would it look like if you ran Texas? He said, what would it look like if you ran the United States? Would it be any different? I was like, yeah, that's a good question. And the question is really this: whenever you're thinking about anything, am I going to do this in the nature and character of the one who created it all? Well, how do I know what that is unless I ask him what he thinks and how he sees this stuff? So imagine we had a president, or we had people in Congress, or we had people at the DMV that were literally saying, hey, I'm doing this with Jesus. That's what he called the transfer. It's the transfer of the man. And the thing about it is there's people across the world that are prepared for this. You're prepared for this. If you're hearing this and it's resonating with you, it's because he's guiding you. This is an important time that, you know, those that are part of the ecclesia, the called out ones that are like, hey, Jesus, what do you think about this? And how do you see this? And what did you mean by that? That's where the life is. It's where it is. He's the way, directional, truth, can be probed, the way, purpose. And it's like, let's go. Let's go. Ray, last words from you before we wrap things up, my friend.
Don't even know what to say. Just thank you for having me on.
Yeah.
I appreciate Steve's words, or what God has allowed Steve to say,
Yeah.
and communicating to us that it's better to do it with Jesus. And honestly, you know, when I think about doing things with Jesus, I can plan all that I want. But things that Jesus can do and wants to do can happen in a moment.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's exciting to be able to be part of that.
Well, and
So
we're
thank
living
you.
in a time of change. You bet, dude. Thank you so much, Mr. Ray. See you soon, my friend. And Hex Monkey is in the house. Actually, Ray's going to say hi to our buddy Hex Monkey. What's up, Hex Monkey?
Hex Monkey!
Awesome. I knew he wanted to do that. Dude, it's so good to see you. I talked to Danny and he told me about some amazing things that happened in Vegas and all that stuff. But when real life is greater than when Lambo, dude, so good to see you, bud. So awesome. Well, folks, episode 30 is the one that we took the clip from. So if you want to, like, in a way, I'm going to do exactly what Steve said. Don't listen to me. Ask him yourself. That's number one. Number two, this stuff is just jam-packed. There's 37 episodes with Steve. They're on my channel. All you'd have to type into YouTube is Right Side Up Steve Staggs. we're going to end up having a tool that just is helping you like use search words, and you could literally search up the content. That's going to be cool. And actually, ZZ Tesco is the one that's creating that tool just so that you can find what you want to find. But one of the things that Steve said, he said that the truth is probable. Okay, so what is the truth? Well, the truth is the truth, right? It's an absolute thing. And so when you find something that is true, you can continue to probe it. In this world, so many people are telling you what's true. But if you ask them questions about it, right, like COVID or vaccines or whatever it may be, they're going to say to you, you can't ask that question or shut up. And that's your indication that we're not dealing with truth, because the truth can last through as much probing and as much exposure as possible. But folks, we're coming into an amazing time, and it's happening. And Steve said, don't add any energy to it. Let it happen. Walk with Jesus. See, invite him into every single minuscule moment. Hold each thought captive. Pray without ceasing. All of those things, and see where it goes. And what's amazing about that is a lot of what, the discipline of Steve of hanging out with the dude was, hey, you kind of showed him how it works. And what it comes with that, well, peace that transcends all understanding and some amazing miraculous things. And I'm super, super thankful for that. And I think you'll see that same thing. If you want to join in conversation with us on Telegram, you can go to, you can search Right Side Up. That's the name of the Telegram channel. I'm going to put, well, am I? Yeah, I am. I'm going to put that into the, I'm going to get a link here. I think I'm going to get a link here. And you'll be able to, I think, actually somebody might put it the link. If you're in the Right Side Ups, put a link to the Telegram in the chat here. I'll have to put it into the description. But love to engage with you. And it's not just me, like everybody, just having this conversation and living life together. I think there's such a desire for people to go, hey, is there really a reason that I'm here? Yes, there is a reason that you're here. And what's so cool about it is you ought to be prepared, because what I've found is the same thing that happened to Paul happens to a lot of us. We get knocked off our horse and go blind, and then we end up having a whole new trajectory to our life. And that's really the ultimate thing. It's like, okay, let's follow the good shepherd and stop kicking at the goads. Thanks for joining again today. My name is Matt. This is Crypto Heartbeat. And every Friday at 11 o'clock Central Time, we do Right Side Up in honor of Steve Staggs. And we will continue to do that. But love to have you involved with the community as we build it in the Right Side Up Telegram channel. And take care of yourself. And thank you, the 148 people that are here. You guys are amazing. Take care of yourself and don't mess with Texas. Take care, everybody.